That night in downtown Seattle, the air inside the ballroom shimmered with money and pride. Every seat was filled. Reporters, investors, politicians, friends, all gathered to honor one man. Ethan Caldwell, age 38, billionaire tech mogul, philanthropist, a man who rebuilt half the city's skyline and donated millions to hospitals. He stood tall at the podium, microphone in hand, his expensive suit glinting under the stage lights. And beside him, standing quietly, holding a glass of water like she always did, was a woman no one really noticed. Grace Mendez, 29 years old, a caretaker, not a guest, not a celebrity, not a woman anyone there had come to see. For most people in that room, she was invisible, just the help. But in the next few seconds, she would do something that would make the world stop talking about Ethan Caldwell's charity and start talking about her. As Ethan began his speech, the crowd quieted. The cameras zoomed in. Somewhere high above the ballroom, on a balcony no one had checked properly, a scope flickered. A faint red light began to move across Ethan's chest. Grace noticed first. Her heart pounded. Her breathing slowed. She whispered 2 words, so quietly the microphone didn't catch them. "Be quiet." Then, before anyone could blink, she stepped forward, grabbed her boss by the collar, and kissed him. The room exploded in shock. Hundreds of guests gasped. The sound of glasses hitting tables echoed through the hall. The billionaire's fiancé screamed his name. And then, bang! A gunshot shattered the top of a champagne bottle inches from where Ethan's head had been. Security dove to the floor. People screamed, ducked, and ran. But in the middle of all that chaos, Grace stood frozen, her hands still on his face, her eyes wide with disbelief. That kiss, the one everyone thought was a scandal, the one that would be splashed across every news headline the next morning, was the only thing that saved his life. Within minutes, the internet was on fire. Clips from inside the gala went viral before the police even arrived. Caretaker kisses billionaire boss on stage. Security breach or secret affair? Mystery woman saves mogul from assassination attempt. Everyone had an opinion. Some called her a hero. Others said she was desperate for fame. But the truth, the real truth, was far more complicated than anyone knew. That kiss wasn't passion. It wasn't attention-seeking. It was survival. A moment of pure instinct from a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. What happened next would tear open secrets buried deep inside Ethan Caldwell's empire. Betrayals, stolen money, and a plot that had been forming long before that night. And it all began with one quiet woman who refused to stand by and watch another person die. This is her story. The story of Grace Mendez, the caretaker the world ignored, and the decision that changed both of their lives forever. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Before the world called her a hero, Grace Mendez was just a worker, invisible, replaceable, and easily ignored. But months before that shocking night, her story began inside a mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. The Caldwell estate sat above Lake Washington, cold, quiet, and full of people who smiled without warmth. When Grace arrived, the staff barely noticed her. The butler gave her rules, not greetings. She learned quickly, speak only when spoken to. Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire she was hired to care for, was recovering from an injury. He sat surrounded by magazine covers with his own face on them, a man once powerful, now trapped in silence. Their first meeting was short. He said, "Just do your job." She answered softly, "Yes, sir." And that was how it began, a life of quiet service in a world that measured worth by wealth. Days turned into weeks. Grace worked tirelessly, cleaning, cooking, helping him through therapy, enduring the cold stares of those who saw her as nothing. Yet she stayed calm, never fighting back. Sometimes, strength means saying nothing at all. One afternoon, during therapy, Ethan fell. Grace caught him before he hit the floor. For a moment, he looked at her differently, not as an employee, but as a person. He said nothing, but later that night, when she brought his tea, he whispered, "Thank you." It was small, but it was the first crack in the ice. Then came Clara Stone, Ethan's glamorous fiancée. Her perfume filled the house before her words did. To her, Grace was invisible. But one evening, Grace overheard Clara say, "He's half a man now. I can't keep pretending." Grace froze. Every word cut deep, not because they were hers to feel, but because she saw the pain they caused him. That night, Ethan sat alone by the window, staring at the rain. Grace entered quietly with his medication. After a long silence, he asked, "Why are you still here?" She replied gently, "Because you need someone who still sees you." In that moment, something changed. He didn't smile. He didn't thank her. But the loneliness in his eyes began to fade. And as thunder rolled over Seattle, a fragile bond was born. One that neither of them understood, and one that would soon be tested in ways neither could imagine. As the weeks passed, Ethan Caldwell began to recover. His strength returned. But so did something else, suspicion. Grace noticed the change first. He spent hours locked in his study, speaking in low tones on the phone. His temper grew sharper, his patience thinner. Something was haunting him, and it wasn't his injury. One evening, while cleaning his office, Grace saw papers spread across the desk. Financial statements, wire transfers, signatures repeated twice on the same page. She looked closer and froze. There were offshore accounts in places she couldn't even pronounce. She set the papers down quickly, pretending she hadn't seen them. But from that moment, her eyes were open. The next day, a man arrived in a tailored suit, his smile too polished to trust. Victor Hale, Ethan's financial advisor. He came often, always when Grace was nearby, always whispering behind closed doors. She wasn't supposed to hear, but the walls in that house carried secrets like echoes. One afternoon, she heard Victor say quietly, "If this leaks, you'll lose everything." Then silence. Then Ethan's voice, low, tired, afraid. "Handle it. I don't care how." That night, Ethan barely spoke to Grace. He stared at her longer than usual, as if trying to decide whether she knew too much. And the next morning, Clara arrived again. Clara's words came fast, sharp, rehearsed. She told Ethan that Grace had been snooping, that she was stealing company information, maybe even selling it. Grace never defended herself. She just stood there, hands trembling, eyes full of disbelief. Under pressure and fear, Ethan made a choice he would soon regret. He looked at her and said quietly, "You're dismissed, Grace." Sometimes betrayal wears the face of advice. She packed her few belongings in silence. When she stepped outside, the air felt different, heavier, watched. At the end of the driveway, she saw a man across the street holding a camera, pointing it toward the mansion. The moment she turned, he disappeared. She tried to shake it off, but something in her gut whispered, this wasn't over. That night, in her small apartment on the edge of town, Grace tried to rest. She replayed every word, every look, every strange document she'd seen. Then came the sound, a click at her window. She turned, heart pounding. Nothing. Then she noticed it. An envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single note. "Stay quiet, or you'll regret it." In that moment, Grace understood. This was no misunderstanding. This was danger, real, calculated, and close. She sat in the dark, the note shaking in her hands, realizing that what she had stumbled upon wasn't just a rich man's problem. It was a trap, and now she was part of it. A week after firing Grace, Ethan Caldwell collapsed in his study. Doctors rushed in, staff panicked, and the mansion that once ran on precision fell into chaos. He had ignored his therapy, skipped medication, and pushed his body too far. The specialist told him bluntly, "Your recovery depends on trust. She's the only one you respond to." Reluctantly, Ethan agreed. Grace was called back. When she arrived, she wasn't the same woman who had left. She stood taller, calmer, a woman who had seen danger and survived it. Her first day back was quiet. The air in the house carried tension. Some staff avoided her eyes, others whispered. But Ethan watched her differently this time. Not as an employee, but as someone who had once caught him before he hit the ground. Late that night, as the mansion slept, Grace tidied his office. She paused by his desk and saw his laptop screen still lit. A message blinked in the corner. Incoming transfer complete. She frowned, curiosity outweighing fear. The files looked encrypted, long strings of letters and numbers that didn't belong. She remembered the papers she had seen weeks ago. Offshore accounts, duplicate signatures. Something was happening again, something big. And the name that kept appearing on those documents was the same one that had haunted her since she left. Victor Hale. She sat down, opened her own old laptop, the one she used in nursing school, and began decoding line after line. Hours passed. Her small desk lamp flickered as she uncovered a pattern. Money funneled from Ethan's company into shell accounts under Victor's control. But there was something worse hidden in the final set of files. An internal memo with one line that made her blood run cold. All transfers complete. Execute plan upon confirmation of death. Grace froze. It wasn't just theft, it was a setup. Someone wanted Ethan dead the moment his money disappeared. She sat there in shock, realizing that the man who fired her had been marked for murder, and that she might be the only person alive who could stop it. She grabbed her phone, dialed Ethan's lawyer from a block number, and spoke in a trembling whisper. Check Victor Hale. He's not protecting Ethan. He's bleeding him dry. Please do it now. Before he could ask who she was, she hung up. Across town, Clara Stone was drinking wine on a balcony when her phone rang. A staff member told her Grace had returned. Her smile faded instantly. Grace was back, and Clara knew that meant trouble. By morning, Ethan felt stronger. Grace helped him through his routine, silent but steady. For the first time, he asked about her life, where she lived, what she wanted. He listened. Then he said quietly, "You stood by me when everyone else used me." Grace smiled faintly and answered, "Because silence doesn't mean blindness." Ethan looked at her then, really looked, and realized that the person he had once treated as invisible had just saved his life twice. Once from the fall, and once from the shadows closing in around him. Outside, the clouds over Seattle darkened. The storm was coming again, but this time, Grace was ready. The storm was back, but this time, it wasn't in the sky. It was in the halls of Ethan Caldwell's mansion. Money had been stolen, lies were tightening their grip, and somewhere in the shadows, a plan was unfolding. Victor Hale and Clara Stone had decided that the only way to secure their future was to erase Ethan's. They called it the Comeback Gala. A night meant to prove that Ethan Caldwell was stronger than ever, ready to reclaim his empire. To the world, it was a celebration. To Victor and Clara, it was a deadline. Behind closed doors, Victor made the final arrangements. He spoke softly on the phone, voice smooth as glass. "Once he's dead, everything goes to Clara. I'll handle the rest." The person on the other end didn't respond. They didn't need to. The deal was already in motion. The assassin had already been chosen, a nameless man who would blend in with the media crew at the gala. He would carry a camera, but behind the lens waited a rifle. His instructions were simple. Wait for the lights. Wait for the moment, and make it look like chaos. Grace didn't know all the details, but she could feel it. The tension in the house was heavier than ever. The servants whispered, Victor smiled too often, and Clara moved through the mansion like a woman rehearsing a victory speech. Grace's instincts screamed that something was wrong. One evening, as she brought fresh towels to Ethan's study, she heard a voice down the hall. Victor was speaking on the phone, unaware she was near. His words froze her in place. "Once he's dead, everything goes to Clara. Keep the press ready." Her heart dropped. She pressed her hand against the wall, listening as every piece of the puzzle finally connected. Grace wanted to run straight to Ethan, to tell him everything. But who would believe her now? She was the dismissed caretaker, the outsider. Every warning she gave would sound like desperation. So, she watched quietly, memorizing every detail. Victor's schedule, Clara's behavior, even the seating plan for the gala. She tried once more. When Ethan was reviewing his speech, she stepped forward and said softly, "Sir, please, cancel tomorrow's event." Ethan looked up, confused. "Why would I do that?" he asked. Grace hesitated, then whispered, "Because I don't trust the people closest to you." He smiled faintly, tired. "Grace, I've lived my whole life surrounded by liars. If I start running now, I'll never stop." She wanted to argue, but instead, she nodded and walked away, the weight of helplessness pressing down on her chest. That night, she returned to her small room, fell to her knees beside the bed, and prayed. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "If I can't save him, at least let me try." Outside, thunder rolled over the lake. The city lights flickered like silent witnesses. Across the hall, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the rain hit the glass. For the first time in months, he felt a strange peace, a calm he couldn't explain. Maybe he believed the worst was over. Maybe he simply didn't see the storm waiting behind the applause. Morning came. Rain washed over Seattle as the red carpet unfurled. Reporters gathered, cameras flashed, and guests arrived in glittering gowns and black suits. The world saw celebration. Grace saw a trap. Every story reaches a moment when silence must break, even if it costs everything. For Grace Mendez, that moment was just hours away. The night of the gala arrived like a performance the whole city had been waiting for. The lights of downtown Seattle shimmered on the wet pavement, cameras flashed, and luxury cars lined the red carpet. For the guests, it was a night of power and celebration. For Grace, it was a countdown. She stood backstage, disguised among the catering staff, wearing a black apron and holding a tray she didn't need. Her eyes never left the stage. Every laugh, every flash, every movement was a reminder that death could be hiding anywhere in that room. Ethan Caldwell took the stage with a confident smile. The man who once sat in silence now stood tall before hundreds of people, ready to prove he was back. Behind him, massive screens glowed with the words, "The future begins tonight." No one in the audience could see the small red dot moving across his suit. Grace saw it first. Her breath caught. Her hands began to shake. It was the same red glimmer she'd seen once before, small, steady, and deadly. She whispered under her breath, "Be quiet." Then, without thinking, she began to move. Every step she took felt heavier. The crowd clapped, unaware. Security scanned faces, but not rooftops. She walked up the side stairs, pretending to adjust decorations, pretending she belonged there. But her eyes were locked on one thing, that red light over his heart. She reached him just as he thanked the audience. The world watched as the quiet caretaker stepped onto the stage, reaching for his collar like she was fixing it. Ethan turned, confused, and before anyone could react, she pulled him into a kiss. The cameras flashed like lightning. Gasps filled the ballroom. And then, the gun fired. The bullet shattered the microphone stand beside them, sparks flying. Guests screamed. Security rushed the stage. Grace's body shielded Ethan as she screamed into the chaos. "It's Victor. He's behind this." The sound of panic echoed across the hall. Reporters dropped their cameras. People ran for cover. And on the live broadcast that was streaming to thousands, Victor Hale's face turned white. He pushed through the crowd, trying to escape, but it was too late. Two guards tackled him near the exit. In the struggle, his phone fell, its screen still lit, showing a message sent seconds before the shot. "Do it now." Clara saw it. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of a table, tears streaming as the truth crashed down on her. It was him. It was all him, she cried, her voice breaking. In her panic, she confessed everything: the stolen funds, the deal, the plan to take Ethan's fortune and start a new life overseas. Police arrived within minutes. The assassin was found on the balcony, weapon still warm. Victor was handcuffed and dragged through the flashing lights of the cameras. His perfect suit torn, his empire collapsing live on air. On stage, Ethan stood frozen, still holding Grace's hand. The woman he once ignored had just saved his life, again, and the whole world had seen it. The chaos of the night faded into sirens, flashing lights, and the echo of disbelief. Within minutes, police had the assassin in custody. Victor Hale and Clara Stone were both arrested, handcuffed under the same cameras that once celebrated their luxury. Reporters swarmed the ballroom as Ethan Caldwell stood frozen on the stage, glass shards still glittering at his feet. He looked at the woman beside him, the one he had once dismissed as invisible. His voice trembled as he said, "You risked everything." "What?" Grace looked up, her uniform torn, her hands still shaking. She answered softly, "Because your life was still worth saving, even when you forgot it." In that single moment, every eye in the room turned toward her, the quiet caretaker who had saved a billionaire's life twice, not with power or weapons, but with courage and conviction. News of the incident spread faster than the shot that almost killed him. Headlines flooded every screen. Caretaker saves billionaire at gala. The kiss that stopped a bullet. Grace Mendez, the unsung hero of Seattle. Interviews followed. Reporters called her brave. Lawyers called her brilliant. Neighbors called her a blessing. But Grace said very little. Her message was always the same. Anyone would have done it. Ethan Caldwell saw things differently. He knew what the world didn't. The nights she stayed up decoding his files, the risk she took when no one believed her, the way she stood her ground when everything told her to run. In his first press conference after the incident, Ethan looked into the cameras and said, "Heroes don't always wear suits. Sometimes they wear scrubs, carry quiet hearts, and remind the powerful what real strength looks like." A week later, the company board released a statement. Grace Mendez was officially reinstated, not as a caretaker, but as the new head of community outreach. Her job, to help rebuild lives that power had overlooked. The mansion that once felt like a cage was different now. Open, alive, filled with people whose voices mattered. And at its heart was the woman who once cleaned the floors. In the end, justice was simple. Victor faced years behind bars. Clara disappeared from the spotlight. And Ethan learned the hardest truth of all, that sometimes the ones we ignore are the ones sent to save us. The storm had passed. Weeks later, the city returned to its rhythm. Cars, lights, and the sound of rain brushing against windows. But for Grace Mendez, life would never be the same again. One quiet afternoon, she walked through a small park on the outskirts of Seattle, a single white flower in her hand. The grass was damp, the sky soft gray, the kind of calm that comes only after a long fight. She stopped at a headstone marked with a name almost forgotten by time, her mother's. Grace knelt, brushed away the fallen leaves, and placed the flower gently against the stone. She whispered, "You always said kindness is power. Now I finally believe it." A small smile touched her lips as the wind moved through the trees, like an answer only she could hear. Moments later, the sound of footsteps approached. Grace turned to see Ethan Caldwell walking toward her, holding a small bouquet of daisies. No bodyguards, no cameras, just a man who had finally learned what gratitude felt like. He stopped beside her, placed the flowers down, and said softly, "Seattle feels smaller without your voice." Grace smiled, eyes glistening. "Then let's make it louder," she replied. They stood there in silence, two people from opposite worlds, bound now by something stronger than wealth or fear, respect. The camera pulls back slowly, the city skyline glowing behind them. the sound of the wind mixing with distant church bells. Respect every soul you meet. The person you overlook today may hold the moment that saves your tomorrow. Would you have done what Grace did? Tell us below. We're reading every single comment. And if this story moved you, subscribe for more real-life twists about courage, truth, and redemption.